All right, we are recording. Simon, lovely to have you on the show. Really looking forward to this one.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. A lot to talk about.
Absolutely. And you've not met my co-host. This is Lauren. She is
Nice to meet you, Lauren.
she's my daughter. She's been asking the first question on the Once Bitten podcast since she was 9. So five and a half years in. Been described as the toughest interviewer in the space by Matt Odell. So hold on because you now got to face it down. So over to you, Lauren.
You put a lot of pressure on me because my question isn't even that hard, I don't
Yeah,
think.
but like gauge his response and then like dig in a little bit after that.
Goodness. Okay. Um, what was the first time you heard about Bitcoin?
Okay. Yeah, the first time I heard about Bitcoin, that's a great question. Um, so I got a face, I was part of a community called the Monetary Reform Community. And at that time, there was no Bitcoin. And there was a bunch of retired pensioners that would meet up in a little place in Birmingham called Bromsgrove every year. And they would discuss how they were going to get the world back to the gold standard. And we discuss all these different concepts around banking and the problem with fractional reserve banking, and how to transition out of that system. And we had people like there was this guy in the UK called Dave Fishwick who did like a BBC series on trying to create a new bank. And, this was the type of community that was the pre-Bitcoin community. Um, and I was writing a book on monetary reform. It's called Bank to the Future, Protect Your Futures Before Governments Go Bust. There we go. There's the book. And I was doing the whole technology piece and going right into, I was trying to create a bank at the time, a non-fractional reserve bank, just to see if it could be done. And a guy called Johnny Bitcoin messaged me on a Facebook message DM. And he was like, "Hey Simon, I've moved out of my house. I've sold my house, and I put all my money in Bitcoin. Why don't you come and visit us in Old Street? I've got some developers that are working on Bitcoin code." And he invited me into this squat in Old Street. And he's actually sold all of his house to buy Bitcoin. I think this is pre $1 Bitcoin. This was when it was cents. And so I went to visit him in this what could only really be described as a very horrible place. But there were these Bitcoin core developers there and different people that were working on putting together Bitcoin improvement proposals. And it completely coincided with me getting a letter from the Bank of England. And we'd applied for our banking license. And I said, look, we want to have a bank where people own their own money. So we segregate it, it's completely theirs. We don't mix it with our money. We want it where they can direct the flow of money. So we don't invest it for them. Like if they don't want to invest in military companies or companies that they're not happy with, or drugs companies or anything and pharmaceutical companies, they can direct the flow of their money. And there's a very third important part of it. We don't want to create money every time we issue a loan. We just want to be a safety deposit box, as it were, for digital money. And they came back with this application, and essentially it was too safe for customers. It gave customers too much power, and it actually gave customers the ability to really decide what happened with their money. And so they came back to us and said, well, firstly, you're going to need to deposit £60 million at the Bank of England in order to continue this application. So they don't have £60 million. And then they said, and you're not going to be able to build it on top of your technology. You're going to have to build it on top of Barclays Bank. And I was like, well, if I build it on top of Barclays, then all of our customers' money will go to Barclays, and then Barclays will do with it as they choose. And they said, yes, that's how the system works. There is no way that you can create this unless you build it on top of another bank, and put it in Barclays. And the third thing they said, we had a meeting with the regulator, and I was creating it with my wife. And my wife is, she's Asian in background. She's born in Britain. She's British Asian. But they looked at her and said, you're not the type of person we would normally regulate. And that was where I was with our application at the time. So we stopped the application. And Johnny Bitcoin, when I came to visit him, he said, let me introduce you to this guy called Amir Taki. And Amir Taki appeared on the BBC as one of the very first TV interviews that ever happened with Bitcoin. And Amir Taki is a crazy, crazy person. He went down some very dark places in life, and he was excited about it. Nothing that I would recommend to anybody, but he was excited that he could spend his own money, and he decided to spend his own money on drugs. And he went on national TV and said, Bitcoin's amazing. You can do money laundering it and no one cares, and you can buy drugs. And this was like the first face for Bitcoin. So, it was a very bad representation of Bitcoin in those early days. But he decided to do the first Bitcoin conference in the world, and he invited me to speak in Prague. And this was 2011. And the price of Bitcoin crashed it pumped right up to under $1 to $30. And then during the conference, it crashed 90% from $30 to $3. And then when I was at the conference, there was someone that had created an actual physical Bitcoin with a hologram on it. And I was able to buy 5 Bitcoin for £25 at the time. That was my introduction to Bitcoin. And I saw all these cypherpunks, and the community was really a group of people that just wanted to create freedom for people to be able to transact without the banks. And so the really early community was us versus the banks. The banks had I'd left my career in investment banking, tried to create this bank, very despondent with the world, very despondent with the system, was very deep in debt at the time as well, trying to create this bank, spent all my savings, was deep in debt. And then Bitcoin came along, and I realized, wow, that solves all the problems. So I included it in my book. When Bitcoin price did very well, I kept buying Bitcoin every month with whatever I could put together. It took me to a place I never imagined was possible, and been on the boat for 14 years now to 2025.
Wow.
That's a cool story.
I was gonna say, that's a story.
That is a cool story. The squat in Old Street sounds very fun. Bitcoin conference in Prague. Have you been to BTC Prague? The conference that's now the big ones that are running. They've run for the last 3 years.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I'm somewhat of a strange person now. I'm very security conscious. I built my little castle. I don't travel so much anymore. I try to be as cautious as I possibly can with the types of subjects I like to speak about nowadays.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, yes, I went to that conference in Prague. And that was my one and only time that I've been to Prague. I haven't been back since, actually. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, it is. I was just chatting to one of the founders of it the other day, and they'd love to have you. They'd love to have you, because I think he was even at that conference in 2011 and saw your talk.
Right. There was only about 50 people in the room. That was almost the whole community at the time. So that would be...
Maybe I have that wrong.
Who was there? Was Max Kaiser was there.
Really?
Yeah, he came because he was introduced to Bitcoin when he had Kaiser Report by John Matonis, who was part of the Bitcoin Foundation. We had Mt. Gox as the main sponsor. BitPay was there, and they were pitching this startup trying to create the PayPal of Bitcoin. We ended up investing in that company, actually. Who else was there? Stacey Herbert was there. The founder of Trezor, Isabella, was there, and she had this little incubator where she was trying to create hardware wallets and fund different companies that would help the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Was Obi there? Obi from CoinFloor?
I don't think he was there. CoinFloor came quite a bit later. So right. When I got back to the UK, I became a founding director of 2 organizations, the UK Crowdfunding Association and the UK Digital Currency Association. And CoinFloor was one of the early exchanges in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
The UK Digital Currency Association was doing all that early work to try and get the UK to be a part of the Bitcoin strategy. Interestingly, I had a meeting with Boris Johnson, who was mayor of London at the time, later became the prime minister. As corrupt as it can be in terms of the legacy system, but I gave him a whole Bitcoin strategy and the equivalent of accumulating Bitcoin as strategic reserves, how to attract all the companies, making Bitcoin legal tender by allowing it for payment of tax, and he laughed me out of the room. At this time, the bank that I tried to create was also called the same as the book, Bnk To The Future. And we pivoted it just before this to supporting Bitcoin companies in raising finance, because no venture capitalist would look at any of these companies. This was wacky. This was completely off the scale in terms of even the venture capitalist risks. So we took the platform and we hired some developers from Poland, and built a crowdfunding platform, as it were, but with shares. And we registered the very first securities business where you could invest online using Bitcoin. We actually registered it with the FCA, the regulator. It was called the FSA at the time. That's how long ago it was. But we allowed people to take their Bitcoin and take their fiat currency and invest in the companies that were doing stuff with Bitcoin. We ended up investing through the platform Coinbase, Kraken, Bitstamp, Bitfinex, Circle, weird ones like Ripple Labs that seemed a good idea at the time. Exodus is another wallet, Shapeshift. We did about 100 different companies, and of those, I'd say about 10 of them became multi-billion-dollar unicorns just from this crazy community that were, trying to invest in companies that just made Bitcoin more useful, so we could buy it and use it and stuff. BitPay was another one. So when I told Boris Johnson about that, I was talking about how we could fund all of the Bitcoin companies in the UK. I can get Coinbase to come over. I can get blockchain.com to come over. I'll get, all of the different companies to come over to the UK. And he basically said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do it. The very next day, he completely ignored. And then he launched a campaign. He said, I really like the name Bnk To The Future. And then the next day, he launched a campaign called Bus To The Future. And this Bus To The Future went all around the UK, trying to fund businesses, but get them into debt rather than equity. And we wanted to do it with equity. And so he signed a deal with this development bank that was just trying to get all these businesses into debt, ignored the Bitcoin strategy, plagiarized our name, and then just decided never to reply to us ever again. And so that's when I actually decided we had to leave the UK, because the regulators then started to come after our license right after the meeting. So he obviously had a word with the regulator, plagiarized the name, started trying to get companies in debt rather than using shares and Bitcoin, and became a hindrance to Bitcoin. At that point, I took the strategy over to a local island near the UK called the Isle of Man, which is behind me. The Isle of Man said, all right, we'll do it. And so they created this conference called Crypto Valley Summit. Invited all the companies like OKCoin, all the different big companies came at that time. They even got the government to announce that they're going to start accepting Bitcoin as legal tender for payment of taxes. And then we reincorporated over there, set up the company, got all the companies there. And then approximately 6 months later, the Bank of England contacted the Isle of Man government and said, if you support Bitcoin, if you carry down this route, we're going to remove clearing to all of your banks on the island, because they built the banking system. We have a Manx pound here, and they built the banking system pegged to the the British pound, and it cleared through the Bank of England on top of English banks like NatWest, HSBC, and RBS and everything. So they used it as I call Operation Choke Point. And Operation Choke Point 1.0 was actually coming after the gaming companies in the Isle of Man. The FBI actually flew over to try and shut down the companies. The Bank of England choked all the banks to make sure they didn't support Bitcoin. And one of the companies that set up here was a company called OK Coin. They were doing like payments in Bitcoin. And the government raided their office and shut them down because they said, you're only keeping digital records of your customers. You're meant to print their passports and put it in a safe. And you're meant to have a paper record of all of your customers. And so they shut down the company, and then the Bitcoin strategy was killed by the Bank of England. It was completely choked. And that's when I decided to move to Hong Kong. And Hong Kong kind of gave us a free environment. And we incorporated in Cayman Island. And all these years later, I guess we're still in this hostile environment. But now that governments are broke, they're deciding that maybe they need to embrace this industry to try and use some financial engineering to solve their debt crisis. So it's been an amazing journey. But I stopped working with countries, with the exception of El Salvador, when I went to go meet President Bukele. And then he did it, gave him a strategy. But the IMF has still got that grip, like the economic hitman at the IMF. He didn't manage to get enough Bitcoin to free himself from the IMF, but he's still accumulating one every single day. And hopefully he'll get himself enough Bitcoin where he can take to the Bank of England, go away, the Federal Reserve go away, the IMF go away, and he can actually free himself and liberate himself. So I thought I'd tell you all of that story anyway.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of questions here. Right, Lauren, are you interested in hanging around, or have you got to run off?
I've got to pack.
Right, okay. Well, say thank you to Simon then.
Thank you so much for answering my questions. That was really interesting. Thank you.
All right, pleasure. Thank you. And yeah, we're gonna be discussing more less PG stuff, I think, aren't we now?
Yeah.
Yes. All right, have fun. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers. Is your gain on your microphone just a little high? It's coming through a little bit crackly sometimes.
Is it?
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how to adjust that, actually.
No, that's better. That's better. I think just you pushing it back might have just helped a little bit.
Okay.
But, right, mate, where to start? Simon. Like you and I feel like a kindred spirit in you, because you follow the money, you go down the rabbit holes, you're not afraid to talk about it, point out like where you see wrongdoing. You've mentioned the economic hitman. We've probably both read the book or the books of John Perkins and understand them inside out. I spent 18 years in foreign exchange markets. I started my career in London on the spot dollar mark desk, and the busiest market by far. And then, of course, the euro comes along and everybody loses their job and it consolidates. And I didn't even know what money was. I just did my job. I moved on to derivatives, quoting foreign exchange currency options to the world's biggest banks. What do you call it? The proof of weapons network that lies behind all of that. The saddest thing there is
UK and foreign exchange. You're actually reminding me. It is actually taking me a trip down memory lane, because I used to work in investment banking. I left in 2006. Did market making. So I started at a stockbroker, TD Waterhouse in Manchester. Then blagged my way into the city. Got a job as a market maker for the ABC. Peel Hunt, Danish? No, it's Danish, not Dutch. And then worked on market making on FTSE stocks, and then a market called Plus Markets came along, a competing stock exchange, and then I worked in corporate finance, doing public offerings for venture capital exits, basically. But it just reminds me, you were talking about London and FX. Like London used to be a real player. This was like they were the largest player in the world. And look where we are now. Look where the UK is now. It is just a shadow of a greater structure, just being raped and pillaged and asset stripped by this predatory banking system. But it's amazing how quickly things can change and how quickly things can fall. Sorry, yeah, carry on. So you were in FX and in options.
Yeah, exactly. And you come out of that, and I've gone through so leaving that and then finding Bitcoin, you face your demons, right? Because you had no idea what you were part of, like none. And I don't think I could, other than being a foreign exchange trader, which is higher than the broker, because the broker is always the little bitch boy that gets screamed at for not making the right markets and getting the right prices, or you know how it is in those toxic environments. Figuring out what you were a part of, it's very dark when you realize how immoral and unethical the whole fiat system is. Just fiat currency itself, like the philosophy of it, and the way it was invented by Paul Warburg, basically in the secret meeting on the Jekyll Island meeting of 1910. And this is the thing where you start losing a lot of listeners at this point, because here we go, the conspiracy theorists are at it again. Oh, let me guess, it was a Rothschild, the Rockefellers, JP Morgan. Yeah, yes, it fucking was. Like, all you got to do is read a book. Like, there are 2 or 3 books out there that are brilliant. Eustace Mullins' The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, I think, is the absolute best on this topic. And when you follow the money and you realize that everything, when you and I understand this now, but a lot of people, again, they don't. They say the money is broken. It's not. It's working perfectly as designed. Perfect.
Yeah, it's fixed, as it were, in both meanings of the word. But it's. I think people just need to go through their journey. You bring up a really important point. So when I was working in investment banking, I was really proud of my job. Like, I'd worked hard. Like, I wasn't that academic, but I did the whole degree thing, a master's thing. I punched above my weight academically. And throughout university, I remember I was like, my father kind of, he trained me to be a business person. I came from an entrepreneurial family. He was self-made, came from poverty, made his first million and lost it all in the stock market. And he lost it in the 2000 dot-com boom and bust. And he didn't have a clue what he was doing, but a lifetime of rags to riches, like, was wiped out in a week. It was the most traumatizing experience for the family. He felt so demotivated, like a whole lifetime of building, punching above his weight, and he lost it all in that dot-com boom and bust. And he said to me, son, where's the money? What happened? I had this balance and now I got nothing. And I'm not ready to go back to work. Pensioner at this time. I committed to finding out what happened to his money. And this was 2000 at this time. And so I started.
How old were you at that point?
2000. So where are we? 20. 20. Yeah. So I was 20 years old. So I went off and immediately I forgot about the way he taught me business. And I went to university and thought, right, I've got to learn economics. I've got to learn how these markets work. And you get indoctrinated into being a worker bee for a bank, essentially. And you learn these economic theories, which take you down the route of justifying essentially how central banking works today. But you never go into the real debate around money. These economic models like Keynesian economics and monetarism, they kind of just assume a 2% inflation and the governments need to go into debt in order to subsidize and get back to full employment. There's a whole bunch of assumptions which haven't been resolved in economics, but that's actually how this central banking system works. And you realize throughout university, you're just being trained into a minion. And I ended up trying to get into banking, blagged my way in. But here's the point. I was really proud of what I'd achieved. And I was working 100 hours a week, like they work you like crazy. But I had zero time to comprehend how the system really works. And this people find very hard. Now, firstly, I mean, information is so much more readily available today. I came from when I was at school, we were doing pen and paper. And when I was at university, computers, we were printing computers and put, the slides and putting them in a folder. And then by the time I was working, we were all digital. So I went through that whole transformation from pen to paper all the way through. But people think that people in the banks actually understand how this stuff works. You get pushed into a cog, and there are thousands of cogs that make up this machine. And very few people actually understand how all of the cogs fit together. And so I was manipulating shares as a market maker. That was one cog. And then I was taking companies public in corporate finance. That was one cog. But it's not until you put everything together, relearn everything. And I just had to leave banking in 2006 when I started reading books. One of the books I read was Michael Rowbotham. And it was called, I've forgotten the name of the book now. It was Grip of Death. And it went through like the enslavement of mankind through all this IMF and all of this different debt, and started learning about how the third world is in more debt than when they originally took the loan, and it's paid off the loan 5 times over, but it's still 5 times greater in debt. And just really, I was horrified learning how the system works. And you start going down different conspiracies. I remember I was interviewed by Bill Still and started hanging around in these Money Masters documentaries and things like that. And they come across as conspiracy theories. But I decided to fact check it with actual Bank of England reports and papers, and real academic papers. And it's actually, when you discover how the real system works, it's worse than the conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm.
The conspiracy theory tells you things like fractional reserve banking. And they say you have some reserves at a bank, and then you're able to lever it up 10 times over. There's actually no reserves and no fractions. And it's actually just, they create as much money as a bank wants to. And it's based upon the demand to borrow it. And so is it any wonder why governments are in debt, corporations are able to utilize debt to manipulate markets, and individuals are deep in debt? And the only way to beat the system is to kind of leverage the debt markets, take out a mortgage and hopefully have enough equity in your home so you can refinance it and roll over your credit cards. Well, the whole system is engineered to create digital currency as a debt. And the reality is you've got to go right back to the real simple part. And the real simple part was never taught in economics. They teach you these theories like money multipliers and quantity theory of money, and various other things, that Milton Friedman and all this stuff, and Adam Smithsonian, like classical economics. But actually, there's a reason why it came, like The Wealth of Nations was written, I think it was 1756 or something. You can fact check that, around about that time. But it was 10 years before the US Constitution and the independence from England, where the Bank of England, they talk about tax and Boston Tea Party. It was actually a war over central banking. Like the war between Britain and America was a war of colonization through central banking. And we won. We got the Federal Reserve in 1913. Assassinations happened. 2 central banks came and went. But eventually in 1913, they got what they set out to create, which was the enslavement of the American economy to bankrupt the US government, just like the Bank of England did to Britain. That is this process that this banking system is actually designed to do. And if you get right back to it, simple, every single pound, euro, or dollar is only created when somebody borrows it into existence. So the banks already invented digital currency before Bitcoin. It's just a digital ledger when you go to a bank and you take on a mortgage, they create that money. The money doesn't exist. It's not grandma's money or her savings. It just literally is created into existence as a digital ledger on the bank. And you log into your own online banking, and you say, right, I've now got this money. It's going to buy this house. And now I've got a liability to the bank that I need to meet. And if I don't meet that liability, they take my house. And you keep refinancing this house. And essentially, as long as you hit the point where you've got enough income to service all your debt, then you are a useful idiot for this system. And they don't want you to repay the debt, because then they've got to find someone else, because every digital currency is somebody else's debt. So if you repay the debt, the money supply shrinks. But when you get back to its actual roots, if you borrow $1,000 and that creates $1,000, and you need to repay that, let's say with a 10% interest, then you owe $1,100. Where's the $100 to pay the $1,100 back? It doesn't exist. And so you have to go create economic activity, and then they have to find someone else to borrow it. And then they have to, essentially, you have to create something that persuades the person that created this debt to give you enough money so that you can pay the $100 on top. And now he needs to go find someone else. And you go out to this in the macro economy, that the money does not exist to repay the interest on the debt. So it is fundamentally only ever repaid by issuing more debt. And we've got a word for that. It's illegal outside of the banking system. If you do that in a fund, you end up in prison like Bernie Madoff. It's called a Ponzi scheme, like Charles Ponzi. But the fundamentals of our currency is actually a debt-based Ponzi scheme that inevitably, predictably, and guaranteed will implode on itself in the end if you can't find that next marginal buyer of new debt. And that is the system that was created. And it was created in 1694 by the Bank of England, when the French and the Brits needed to go to war, and a business plan was put forward with William Paterson in order to get the King of England to fraudulently hand over the creation of the pound to the Bank of England, a private bank, and continually have a mechanism for scamming the British people out of this fraud of digital currency and a Ponzi scheme. And what did they do to pay the interest? They introduced an income tax. And so the income tax was a mechanism for stealing money from British people to pay the interest on the debt that the government had said, if we create this obfuscated scheme, then we can continually borrow. And if we can continually borrow, then the Bank of England, all they need to do is agitate wars. And so the early banking families, all they did was fund both kings. They'd fund the French Revolution and the British side. They would fund both sides of those wars, and they would guarantee each loan, where whoever wins assumes the debt of the loser. And so this just became a business model. And it expanded globally, and it hits the point where eventually, because there's not enough money, the government goes bankrupt. And that's what happened to the British government. So people think of the British government and the Bank of England as one thing. No, the Bank of England was a system for bankrupting the British government. And he who issues the loan controls the borrower. And so through this mechanism, they created a structure whereby the Bank of England, the government becomes subordinate to the Bank of England. And then you control the government, and the government just becomes a tool and a mechanism for pushing policy that restructures this debt. And when the government becomes bankrupt, which happened pre-World War I, you agitate wars. And so what did they do? Well, you talked about 1910. And so a bunch of bankers that represented both American billionaire families, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, and oil interest and industrial revolution interest would sit down, and JP Morgan, he only held on to 20% of his wealth. 80% of his wealth was unknown, probably European bankers. And so there were then representations of European banking interest from this Bank of England model. And they had 2 attempts to get a central bank in America and do the same exercise. But presidents got assassinated over it, but they eventually got shut down with Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson. And there's interesting stories, but too much to go into. We'll get to just the start of this because it brings us to how the system is today. Then they meet in Jekyll Island. They engineer how we're going to get this system past Congress. They buy political support, the Aldrich plan, and they put forward a proposition. And prior to this, JP Morgan manipulated the copper market in order to create the panic of 1907. All of these banks went bust and got consolidated into the most powerful banks. And then they engineered the central banking system as a result of trying to solve the problem that they created. So they agitated a problem. They then solved the problem. So they put together a plan in the Jekyll Island. And then on Christmas Eve, they got it past Congress when hardly anyone was there. And they buried the Federal Reserve Act in a bunch of other stuff. The title of the act didn't even say anything about banking. And there were, just like the Big Beautiful Bill had 1,000 pages, there were thousands of pages of all sorts of stuff. And buried in there was essentially handing over the creation of the dollar to this Federal Reserve. And in order to try and make it sound like it was government, they called it federal. In order to make it sound like it was stabilizing, they said it was reserves. And then they made it look like it was decentralized government control. So they said 12 states will own the Federal Reserve. So you had these 12 central banks of different states. But the shareholders of the state central banks were the banks. And so now you have the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are the banks. And so you talk about today, Jerome Powell reduces interest rates. Well, who's meeting in this FOMC meeting? Who are they optimizing for? Are they optimizing for stable prices and maximum employment? No, he's a patsy for the banks. And the banks meet every quarter and tell their FOMC patsy what they need. And then the chairman comes and tells the people how this is good for America. And then the president either, comes along and says, yeah, but who does the president work for? They work for the banking lobby. Every single politician is funded by lobbies. And the most powerful lobbies are banking lobbies, pharmaceutical lobbies, military lobbies, and other forces like Israeli lobby, which is an interesting one. But you have all these lobbies that control the government. So the government works for the same lobbies. The chairman of the Federal Reserve works for the same banks. And the central bank is just a mechanism for supporting its shareholders, which is the banks. And so you have this incredible scheme that was created. So then it comes into act in 1913. And guess what? The government debt at that time was minuscule in America. They had a state banking system. They were anti-debt. They always paid off their debt whenever they went into debt. But it went in a straight line, essentially, from virtually zero debt to $37 trillion of debt today. How did they get there? Well, they agitated World War I. 1913 Federal Reserve. What else happened in 1913? Income tax. So instead of funding America through tariffs, they did it through you. So then you have 1914, World War I. What came from World War I? Well, Wall Street, the same banking families, funded the Nazi Hitler regime. They funded the overthrow of the Russian Tsar through the Bolshevik Revolution. which led to the creation of communism in the Soviet Union. And they took over America and implemented the same debt-based Ponzi scheme that sent England bankrupt, called the Federal Reserve Act. So now you've got fake capitalism with the justification of modern economics. You've got communism and you've got fascism. You go into World War I. What was the end result of World War I? All of the gold from all the colonial expeditions of the British Empire ended up in Fort Knox, with the Federal Reserve being able to use it as collateral. What happened to Russia's gold? Well, a bunch of it just goes missing, but suddenly a bunch of it ends up in Fort Knox. What happened to Germany's gold? Well, they created the Bank for International Settlements, and the Bank for International Settlements was essentially the Reichsbank, the German bank. And what happened is every time Nazi Germany or Hitler invaded a new country, the Bank for International Settlements, which, by the way, didn't store any gold, all the gold was held at the Swiss Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, and the Bank of England. And it would go to the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve and say, hey, Hitler's now in Czechoslovakia. Can you just take the label on the drawer of that gold and change it from Czechoslovakia to Germany? And now it's Germany's gold. And so you had this funded the National Socialist movement and various other things. But all of that gold at the end of it, when we had the agitation into World War II and various other things, ended up in Fort Knox. So 75% of all the world's gold ended up in Fort Knox. And America was the only country that didn't get bombed, and they created all of the military industrial complex that was needed, and they managed to install their own central banks in Germany and Japan and Italy. And so now you've got a mechanism for doing the same thing at Germany, Italy, and Japan, and America, and Britain. And the Bank for International Settlements became the central bank for all central banks. So what did you need next? You needed World War II. What did World War II do? It took the world off the gold standard. So you agitate World War II. America creates this massive military industrial complex, which was backed by 75% of the world's gold. What was it? And by the way, if you subscribe to the cartoon version of World War I and World War II, you have to relearn history. Everything you've been taught is a lie. Everything you've been taught is an absolute lie through the propaganda, the propagandized version of what we need today.
Through the education system that's owned by the same people,
which is funded by the same organizations. What are these large endowment funds? Why are universities and colleges the largest money managers in the world next to pension funds? Is that what education's meant to be? No, it's a money laundering organization for influencing the syllabus so that essentially the syllabus acts in the interest of the corporations that the banks have managed to become these major shareholders in. Whether that means, being a doctor means you're just a drug dealer. Whether that means whether it means economics means you're just a debt dealer. Mm-hmm. You create these mechanisms.
Lawyer, judge.
Yeah, a lawyer is just to prop up the system. And so you have all of these different things, but they did a very clever design post World War II. They essentially said, we got all the gold. We got 75% of the gold. We're going to force you to adopt the dollar. You don't have any choice. John Maynard Keynes came and sat around this meeting called Bretton Woods. He wanted to create a global currency called Bangor. And that proposal was rejected in favor for the dollar being fully convertible into gold, and then creating a new organization called the IMF. And the job of the IMF was to convert all the international currencies at a fixed rate to dollars, or manage a market price for dollars. But none of them were convertible into gold. and you had to price gold in dollars. And, during this Great Depression, obviously America also stole all the gold from the Americans. They made gold ownership illegal. You had to swap it in for a $35 Federal Reserve note. It's now worth $3,700. They got it for $35. So they got all the American people's gold as well in this one coffer. You created a system whereby the IMF would create this market for all of their currencies, and you convert your currency to dollars. And then if you need to swap your dollars for gold, then you can do that. And that was the promise. And so what happened immediately after World War II? All right, okay, we're ready for peace. Well, we needed to create a military industrial complex. So you then got the creation of the intelligence agencies. It was created originally by MI5 and the British Empire and MI6. But the American version arose. How did that arise? It was a partnership between those that were useful from the Nazi Germany movement through Operation Paperclip. And so the Nazi Germans became part of the CIA. And then they partnered with two factions of power in America. One was the Italian mafia. And the Italian mafia created this elaborate money laundering scheme for all of these black op criminal operations. And that was through a partnership with the Jewish mob, the Jewish mafia. And so people think
Meyer Lansky, wasn't it, that was heading that?
Yes, exactly. Meyer Lansky. And so, when you say the word Jewish, people call you anti-Semitic, and it creates this chain reaction. That was from World War II. The Holocaust was weaponized. This was all part of creating these justifications, led to the creation of Israel. The Balfour Declaration was just a way of recruiting an army to get oil in the Middle East by weaponizing the Jewish religion and the Christian religion, and a
lot of people get mixed up with the Balfour Agreement. They think that was all put in place in 1944 after the war. In fact, it was 1917 that was signed, and that was Churchill was part of that whole dog and pony show as well. With very, very tight links to the Rothschild family, because Churchill's father was bankrupt, Randolph, and his good buddy from school, Nathaniel Rothschild, took him under his wing and sent him out to Rhodesia to look after the mining concerns of the Rothschilds over there. So basically bought the Churchill family by rescuing the father from debt, and then used them and their influence to get through the signing of the Balfour Agreement in 1917, which, it's also, again, people are going to be like, oh, these two conspiracy theorist guys are like, no, here's just the hard facts that we're laying out to all of you right now.
1917 was significant, actually, because what happened in 1917? So remember, America's going through the Industrial Revolution. They're going through the second wave, and they've now built the military industrial complex. And they need to fund these various wars and get these weapons around the world. And they needed oil. So what did they do in order to get oil? Well, firstly, the Wall Street funded the Bolshevik Revolution to take all of Russia's oil. There was a resistance against that, and you had the communism and the Soviet Union. That didn't quite work. So Rothschild managed to work with the Zionists, and essentially created a mechanism for having a destabilizing force within the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire. And so if you could have this, recruit the religious justification in order to radicalize Jewish people to want to move over to a region and forcefully engage in terrorism through Haganah and various other terrorist groups. These were the very first terrorist groups. It was invented by the Zionists in order to take Palestine.
And just on that point right there, Simon, people again might be wondering, this word Zionist, but it's basically a religious belief, right? That's what's the best way you could explain Zionism to somebody?
Zionism is an ideology that was created by atheist Jews that would confuse a religion between a nationalism, an ethnicity, and weaponize confusion in order to radicalize those that subscribe to the Jewish faith. That if you could take the Old Testament and the New Testament and confuse a prophet called Israel with a land and a nation, and a promise from God that was conditional upon meeting God's covenants, depending on your religious beliefs, that you could scam the Christians that would later be called evangelical Christians into believing that they needed to protect the Jews and they needed to be in a country called Israel that didn't exist. And you could completely confuse their ideology to radicalize Jews to recruit an army to destabilize the region and make sure that oil resources didn't compete with the American empire. So it's basically an ideology that says the Jewish people should be on this land, and they should be able to kick out whoever's on there. And it needs to be a Jewish, the only Jewish land in the world. And therefore, it created all of this crazy propaganda to justify what essentially they were doing is what America was created in the first place, which is the Europeans were radicalized into believing that they were freeing religious persecution. And they were. There was really, these ops aren't about faking things. It's about doing them and then weaponizing them. So there was religious persecution, which you create. Then you take all of those people and say they're doing God's work, and you ethnically cleanse, rape, massacre, and pillage the local population. And so America was created by a genocide. The British Empire used this continually. And this is what essentially they were going to do in Palestine, because there was, empires were colliding at this time. The Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire, and various other powers, the Russian Empire and various other powers. And so anyway, 1917, they just declared parts of the Ottoman Empire that was occupied by the Brits over to the Zionists. And the declaration was made to Walt Rothschild. So it was the Rothschilds that actually organized this. And it was a settler colonial movement to plonk a new nation called Israel on top of Palestine. And the way you do that is you control the media, you rewrite the narratives, you say that it was just a desert with nobody there. And essentially there were Jewish people there. There were Muslims there. There were Christians. Originally in Abrahamic faith, everyone was a Jew, and then some converted to Christianity, and then some converted to Islam. And so the land at this time was majority Muslims, with a minority Christian and a minority Jewish. The Jews were always welcome if they were escaping the persecution that they were suffering in Europe. Then they were welcome to Palestine. What wasn't welcome is a settler colonial movement in order to rape, pillage, steal, expel them from their land, take over their land, and expand it and expand it and expand it, which they're doing to this day, still to this day. And the utility of it shifted over time. Originally, it was just a mechanism for expanding a debt-based Ponzi scheme. It was also then a mechanism for ensuring that the oil-rich companies can't compete with the American empire and the British Empire. And then over time, it became a tool for the military-industrial complex, where they created this business model, which is agitate a war, profit from war, destabilize the region, overthrow the government, install a patsy for your agenda, take all the resources so that all the resources work for your country, and then at some stage, get them in debt slavery, mess up their currency through currency manipulation, install a Western central bank that becomes a shareholder in the Bank for International Settlements, use the International Monetary Fund to get debt slavery and the World Bank, and then fully vassalize them into a neo-colonial financial colony. And at that stage, you can do whatever you want with the country. And when you want to rebuild it, you can issue massive loans. And today, if you look at what they're doing today, they essentially want to wipe out all the buildings, profit from the military-industrial complex. They're all US stocks. Then have the rebuild contracts, US stocks, and then implement a technocratic surveillance state and police state, which is US stocks.
Yeah,
and so through this mechanism, you have full technical, financial, and military vassalization. You wash, rinse, repeat. Why are they doing this? Get back to the roots. Because the post-Bretton Woods World War II system required a continual growth of debt forever and in perpetuity, so that people would end up with dollars. They would print their own currencies, inflate their own currencies, destroy the wealth of their own people through these corrupt governments, take on dollar debt, and then that would create a continual demand for dollars. Once you got those dollars, what do? You buy treasuries, you lend it to the US government. And then the US government then hands over the money that they borrow to the US companies. And then those US companies wage a war on the very country that was lending it to them in the first place. And then all of this, and you just have this cycle and cycle and cycle until you've got $37 trillion of debt, where it is today. Eventually it starts cannibalizing itself. And that's where I think we are today. I'm sorry I jumped around a lot, but
no, I love it. I love all the history and taking people down these rabbit holes. And a few things I want to just point out as well in that presentation, for want of a better word, that you said about going all the way back to 1694, the creation of the Bank of England, that coincided with the House of Orange, right? The Dutch royals coming across to the UK to clear house to get that put in place, so that the British and the French could then go to war, and that could all be funded. Then fast forward a little bit to 1812, you had the Battle of Waterloo, where Rothschild had his agent on site during the battle, got the news before everybody else, and then basically dumped everything on the stock exchange, tricked everybody into believing that Britain had lost the battle, and then 24 hours later bought everything back for pennies on the dollar. That's why they are so damn, and still to this day, so damn powerful, because they just cleaned out everything. I think in that instance, in fact, they took over the Bank of England. I can't remember exactly. And then on all of this, you've got usury just all the way down. Like, just a basic example, like the mortgage. You walk in, you take out a mortgage, you give over your life savings, which represents actual work, energy, skills, knowledge, and time spent earning that money. That's just gone because you give that to the bank. They then print the £350,000 on top of that, so you can go and buy your dream house, which you owe them money on. So they are charging you money on money that didn't exist. So you're right to the freaking very heart of usury here. It's so disgusting and so criminal. And then the last thing, you called it, you were talking about the Aldrich plan. And I want to point this out as well for those people, you conspiracy theorists, whatever else. So Nelson Aldrich was the guy that was charged with putting the meeting together in 1910 on Jekyll Island. And if anybody's ever heard of the Rockefeller family, they know John D. obviously was the head. He had one son, John D. Jr. He had 5 sons, I think, in the end. One of those sons was called Nelson Rockefeller. And you'd be shocked to know that his middle name was Aldrich. So yes, there's the direct link for anybody that is sitting there thinking, no, these guys are just crazy. Like, there's your ties. And there's still plenty more as well that we could go through. But I want to now get on to there's some Bitcoin stuff, like what's going on today in the Bitcoin world. And there's 2 things going on right now. We have the debate, core versus nuts, and we have we'll put that aside for a second because I want to get into Bitcoin treasury companies with you. Now, I think there has to be a clear definition as to what a Bitcoin treasury company is. For me, a company, a small to medium sized enterprise, a mom and pop store, a cafe, your bar, your restaurant, barbers, whatever it is, your mechanic who is taking X amount of profit per month to buy Bitcoin for their business is not a Bitcoin treasury company in my eyes. A Bitcoin treasury company are the ones that are backed by venture capital that has been compiled in the background for a founder then to go and acquire an existing company, a shell company that's barely existing on a stock exchange somewhere, anywhere in the world, it seems, and buy that so they can get straight to listed. Then the venture capital company can start loading up on Bitcoin through this vehicle and use magazines and podcasts and conferences and whatever else to hype the hell out of this stuff, to attract money. And this is the really worrying part, Simon, especially for UK people, because it's attracting money from Bitcoiners. Like nobody else cares about Bitcoin treasury companies, not the wider retail market, just Bitcoiners who have fiat currency that they can't use locked up in a pension fund, which they're not going to be able to get hold of for another 10, 20, 30, 40 years, depending on your age. So from what I can tell, venture capital is using these vehicles to dump on people's pension funds. What's your take on all of this stuff?
Okay, let me, I'll tie a few concepts together, and then we'll get into answering that question. So where are we today? We have, at the end of all the history we just talked about, we have what I call a proof of weapons network. Now, I stole that name from Bitcoin. It was called Bitcoin Proof of Work. The reason I use it as weapon is because it uses weapons in order to perpetuate the dollar. Yeah, so essentially you have all these schemes in order to push the demand for dollars so that you can lend it to the government and roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme, whether it be invading oil-rich companies and getting them to price oil in dollars and the petrodollar, whether it be selling technology global through software as a service, where you take your local currency, you then make a payment, it buys dollars and then spends it with Google. Whether it be other consumer applications like Amazon, where you have operations like COVID, which wipe out all the small business and make you buy online. Tariffs as well, wiped out all the small business that can't afford the tariff negotiations, and the large multinational corporations end up acquiring all the companies. That's one that's happening right now as we speak. So you got technical, you got military, and then obviously financial, which is pushing out dollar debt everywhere and pricing gold in oil, and all of this hyper financialization and securitization of everything. So you take anything, put it on the US stock market, and you have to buy dollars in order to invest in those ETFs, in those whatever products, and so that's the whole financialization. Even in the crypto world, stable coins. You issue a stable coin, it's backed by dollars, you lend it to the government, and then they found a new mechanism for selling treasuries. So all of these different systems are just covert operations in order to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. Federal Reserve now has $10 trillion. The banking system has another $10 trillion, and your pension has another $10 trillion. All that $37 trillion of debt and all the other things is all, the next buyer of last resort, as it were. So this is what I call the proof of weapons network. You weaponize media, you weaponize military, you weaponize financial weapons of mass destruction, you weaponize technical weapons of mass destruction, and you weaponize consumption, because those that consume on debt, you only have two choices. One of your choices is you buy assets, and so the rich find ways of leveraging debt to accumulate assets, and hopefully those assets outperform the interest on the debt. If you do that successfully, you get on the wealthy side of the world. If you don't do that and you get in the credit card trap, the student loan trap, the mortgage trap, the debt trap, and you never escape, then you just spend money on consumption and have no assets to beat the resulting inflation. That's the K-shaped economy. So the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. 90% of all stocks are now controlled by 10% of wealthy. Okay. You financialize everything, you securitize everything, and now you tokenize everything. And you create real world assets. That's the latest BuzzFeed. That's your mechanism for keeping the debt-based Ponzi alive. Within that construct, you have a few essential players. Let's call it a financial industrial complex. And it's one big, maybe the most important division in the proof of weapons network. Technical is important, military is important, but financial runs the show today. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity. These are all very important nodes in the proof of weapon network. Okay. So what they do is they have access to private equity, which is where at the lower scale venture capital, you lend them money. So you get all these fake VCs that look like celebrities. But what they're doing is they're just borrowing money and investing it. So you think like they've got all this money because they're a mega bazillionaire. They just got on the right side of the proof of weapons network and managed to get access to credit so that they could borrow that money and buy shares in companies. And then they would leverage that with other people that want to invest as well. So that's the private equity industry. Venture capital on the riskier side, and so you have industries like Silicon Valley. Now, what was Silicon Valley created by? Again, a bunch of fake entrepreneurs were given military technology and they were allowed to use it, whether it be GPS, every single major technology in Silicon Valley, from GPS to artificial intelligence to the internet to everything, was created by the military industrial complex through Pentagon budgets. And it was privatized by selecting these entrepreneurs like Elon Musk that were able to take over those companies, leverage the financial industrial complex to manipulate shares, as long as they paid ball to the proof of weapons network. Then they would become a technology bazillionaire, a celebrity through the media, and would be idolized as an icon, an idol within America, as the celebrity entrepreneur. Then they would have influence. So they're allowed to buy X. He's allowed to buy X. He's allowed to use this technology. The condition is you need to take the government assets, which the taxpayer paid for. They didn't pay for it. The debt paid for it. And they get to utilize it and privatize it so the banks can control it and take it over. Then you have Silicon Valley, you have private equity, you have venture capital, and then you have the debt capital markets, which is the bond market, and the equity capital market. The equity capital market is where essentially you can control the entire system. So if you turn everyone and everything into a product, you launch it on the stock market, then you're able to use your what's called a Cantillon effect, your proximity to the central bank, to borrow at virtually 0%. While the average schmo is paying 40% on credit cards, the bigwigs are paying 0% in quantitative easing. So they're able to borrow at virtually 0% or thereabouts. They could go to the Bank of Japan, they could borrow some 0% money, hedge out the currency risk, and buy stocks. And so these people that have these public companies get to utilize the full extent of the debt capital markets, borrow money at the cheapest rate possible to buy back stocks. And Goldman Sachs and all the hedge funds and all the other people, they get to manipulate prices short term. Long term, it's just based upon how much money is printed. There's no fundamental value in these stocks anymore. It's not a reflection of business. It's not a reflection of cash flows. It's not a price to earnings ratio. It is a Federal Reserve ratio, Like it's the stock market has no bearing on reality, business, economic reality whatsoever. It's just, can you print more money and pump it into the market? And so as long as you can do that, you get the ability to control these stocks. Now all you need, you've financialized every product. You've taken all the private business. You created Silicon Valley, where you get this feeder fund of businesses. They all end up in Google or Meta or those at the top of the chain, the public companies. But you get this flow of always acquiring them in. And it was done by, rather than giving it to the entrepreneur itself, it's done by private equity and venture capital, which borrowed the money in the first place. So it's a very elaborate scheme. And so then you get to the point where, well, so we got the sell side, we got all these products. What's the buy side? Okay, well, what we need to do is we need to force every employer to have an employee pension scheme. And then they have to manage their money with us, the asset managers. And we make the financial system is so complicated that you end up just handing it over to BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard or Fidelity or any of the others. And then they get a continual flow of buy-side volume. Then you get all the money that's going into these universities and colleges, endowments. Then you get all the money that's going into insurance premiums, and you manage all of that money. Then you get all of the self-invested pensions, and then you create a new product called an ETF. And an exchange-traded fund says, look, the market's complicated. You don't want to buy 500 stocks. Why don't you just buy one stock and we'll buy the 500 for you? And we can do that at scale. And so, yeah, that's a good deal. I don't want to pick the stocks. You just tell me which one is, even though the stock market's about 10 stocks now. Everything else is doing badly when priced in gold, and a few tech companies are doing well. But anyway, that's not the point. An ETF means that you have the ability to have a constant flow of buy pressure into all of these stocks. Because someone's saying, I want access to the 500 stocks, and BlackRock saying, I'll buy 500 stocks. And so you keep buying and buying and buying and buying and buying, and this ETF industry gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And now BlackRock becomes a $11 trillion asset manager. So what does BlackRock do? BlackRock says, right, well, essentially, I want a board seat on all of these companies. And so BlackRock says, I'll take a board seat on 20,000 companies. We'll install our board. You can have 10 board seats here, 10 board seats there. So how does it work? You're an entrepreneur. You're the executive. You're running the business. The executive answers to the board. The board is a standoff board which is installed by the investors, represents the shareholders. So the shareholders, the executives work for the board works for the shareholders. The shareholders are able to install their board based upon how big their position is. And so the biggest shareholder in all of these public companies is BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And so what they need is more ETFs, more and more ETFs, more and more public companies, more and more. The financial industrial complex goes and churns and churns and churns, tokenize, financialize, securitize, do as much of that as you can. And we'll churn out board members, and then we'll get the voting control in those companies. And we've got board control and shareholder control. They work for us. Everyone works for us at that point. Everybody works for the asset manager at that stage. Now, Goldman Sachs can say, yeah, but if we don't continue to issue these debt and sell these bonds and do all this stuff, so they've got power as well. So you have a financial industrial complex that creates the products, buys the products, and if you succeed, you're in that chain. And Silicon Valley is the gateway drug. So if you've got a company that's like Michael Saylor works within that construct. He works for the board works for the shareholders, and the largest shareholder is BlackRock. And what is BlackRock? BlackRock is essentially, I call it the CEO of the Proof of Weapons Network. Because not only did they get share control, but they did two other things. They created artificial intelligence technology that aggregates financial data at a scale that nobody else achieved. And so they got something called Aladdin. And through Aladdin, all the central banks use their artificial intelligence technology to manage their monetary policy. So during the financial crisis, the Federal Reserve used Aladdin in order to decide that Barclays has to divest their ETF division, Barclays iShares, and sell it to BlackRock. And BlackRock got a loan in order to buy it. And so they ended up with the biggest ETF department because they were implementing the technology that the Federal Reserve said, Barclays iShares, you need to sell your technology. Goldman Sachs said, hey, guess what? We're not an investment bank anymore. We're a retail bank. And because they're a retail bank, they got access to bailout money because investment banks don't get access. So Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns go down. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, BlackRock get everything. You consolidated everything, and they did it all with the paycheck of the money printer. And so now you've got this proof of, you've got all of this control and this control. What happened during COVID? Treasury said, we're going to do helicopter money. How do we allocate this money? Oh, Aladdin, can you help us figure out what to do with all this money? And so BlackRock got the contract with the Treasury in order to do fiscal policy. So BlackRock is managing fiscal policy, monetary policy, is a board member on every share, and has the largest shareholding through its ETF positions. When you control all of the different companies, what type of companies do you have? Well, who's the largest shareholder in Lockheed Martin? General Dynamic, Raytheon, Palantir, Tesla. What are these companies? Well, Palantir is creating technology to engage in occupation as a service in the West Bank in Palestine. It is also doing genocide as a service in Gaza. It is also the integration between the drones in Ukraine. It is also doing crowd control during the Hajj celebration in Saudi Arabia. It has also got all of the UK data from the NHS, the Department of Defense, taxpayers, HMRC, and is consolidating it all in order to have a police state and a pre-crime surveillance state within the UK. It is also doing that across Europe, where it's manufacturing civil unrest in order to make sure that people use Palantir's technology. Who was the founder of Palantir? Palantir was funded by the CIA venture arm and Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel Founders Fund was funded by Jeffrey Epstein, and then you go down all these different rabbit holes. The point is that these are fake entrepreneurs that are allowed to privatize companies that had Pentagon budget that was stolen from the American people. And if they don't own those shares, they get on the wrong side of the K-shaped economy. If they own those shares, they get on the right side. And you're essentially creating this environment of massive wealth confiscation and massive centralized control. And that's what I call the proof of weapons network. What's underneath those military companies? Let's call it the military industrial complex. The deep state. What's the deep state? The CIA, which is now partnered with Mossad, MI6, Five Eyes. All right, so they get the Pentagon budget. So trillions goes missing in a Pentagon budget, which is part of the $37 trillion debt. That goes to Pentagon. Pentagon then goes to Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic. General Dynamic then contract the CIA. Who does the CIA work for? Do they work in the interest of the national security of the American people? Or do they work in order to agitate wars for Lockheed Martin in order to prop up the demand for dollar globally in this network? And what else do these companies do? All of these companies pull together into lobby groups. And those lobby groups buy Congress, buy Senate, and bribe judicial, and run covert black op operations like Jeffrey Epstein as a contractor. Because there was one part of the CIA I never told you when I was getting there before. The CIA was created to launder money via the Vatican Bank as a partnership between the Jewish mafia, the Italian mafia, the Nazis, and then it was in order to do Banana Republic, which was to create wars in Central and South America in order to support US companies. The CIA works for the corporations. They don't work for national security. And how do they get their budget? Well, they fund black op operations, drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, sex trafficking. So when Trump says we're going to bomb Venezuela in order to stop drugs, he's bombing the wrong people. He's meant to be bombing the CIA. That's an inside job. The drug crisis in America is meant to happen. It's inflicted by your own corporate structure. And the CIA works for the proof of weapons network. And so you have this decentralized network. Now, who owns BlackRock? Who owns State Street? Who owns Vanguard? Well, those are public companies. And so those public companies can be acquired by anybody that wants to buy them. China can buy them. Russia can buy them if the sanctions allow them. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, the American pensions, they invest in each other. So you have this decentralized power structure that essentially allows you to buy the collective West. And so if you've got a bunch of oil and you've got dollars, you can say, I'm not going to lend it to the US government. I'm going to buy BlackRock shares. And now you influence the entire collective West. Once you influence the entire collective West, and I will promise you, I'll get to Bitcoin, but we'll go over. I hope this is interesting to people. I know it's long-winded, but I think it explains so many things. Mm-hmm. This is why governments flood their countries with immigrants after creating wars, and then close the borders, and then create civil unrest so that they can implement technology to control the population. And then the solution is a digital ID, a central bank digital currency, a stable coin, scare the shit out of you in order to make you opt into things because, hey, I'm not even going to leave my house anymore because there's genuine knife crime all across the UK. There's shootings all across America. Ukraine is a war zone that is owned by BlackRock and Russia now. And we're being told by Keir Starmer that we need to send $3 billion a year to Zelensky, who was installed by the Proof of Weapons Network. And who controls all these elections? Nobody in the UK supports Keir Starmer. I don't know I have not met one British person that says, he's my man. I love that guy. Because Macron works for the Proof of Weapons Network. He might as well have an office in BlackRock and Lockheed Martin. So does Keir Starmer. So does Trump. Trump is a bit of a controversial one. People think he's controlled opposition. Nobody is bigger than this system. Zelensky works for it. It is laundering money back into this Proof of Weapons Network, and all drugs, all human trafficking, they're all permitted by the intelligence network. The intelligence network are contracted through Pentagon budgets. Pentagon budgets go to military companies. Military companies are owned by the asset managers. The asset managers are public companies. And so as power dynamics in the world changes, there's no allegiance to America. There's no America first. There's no Britain first. There's no Europe first. There's only company first. And these companies can say, like Goldman Sachs did, why don't we create something called BRICS? And so Goldman Sachs says, hey, the dollar's only going to work for so long. It will be just like the pound eventually. So let's rinse everything we can out of it. And then eventually we're going to have to work with China and work with Russia and work with India. So why don't we create a little bit of tension between India and Pakistan? China's vassalizing Pakistan. It used to be IMF controlled. Modi's our man. Modi's kind of independent, but maybe we can agitate a little bit of aggression there. And then they have to buy more of our weapons. They have to, but it didn't quite work. And so America is failing at covert operations like they've never failed before. We're seeing failure after failure after failure now because the Proof of Weapons Network is negotiating with alternative power structures. They don't want America first. They want BRICS. They want multipolar world, but they'll always host their nation in America, and the American capital markets will vassalize the whole of Europe, the whole of Australia, Canada, anything within the sphere of influence. And so it's just one block controlled by essentially, and who's in charge of BlackRock? Well, Larry Fink now goes to work for interim director of the World Economic Forum. They'll meet with all their friends at Bilderberg meetings. These are not conspiracy theories. Just ask ChatGPT, ask AI if these things are happening. These things are happening. And there is a global corporate agenda that is somewhat decentralized, but not accountable, and controls governments. Keir Starmer, all of these politicians are installed. Nobody is selected, they're elected. They're not elected, they're selected by this network. And all their job is to do is to put a narrative on top. So with all of that, let's get into Bitcoin. I'm sorry, but I hope it was useful. So that's the proof of weapons network. Proof of work is a resistance against proof of weapons. Proof of work does a few things. It allows you to own your own money in self-custody. Once you own it in self-custody, you can spend it peer-to-peer to anyone that also wants to open a wallet. And you can't change the money supply. Those are the three most important things about Bitcoin. Money you can own, money you can spend, and money that has a fixed supply. Nobody controls the monetary policy. Now, if you want to control the monetary policy, you have to do a lot. You have to take over 50% of the mining network. You have to spend an amount of money that is completely infeasible to even a nation state today. You have to take control of all the nodes. You have to own as much Bitcoin as possible. And you have to corrupt developers and persuade developers to change the code. And even then is virtually impossible, because proof of work is simply the largest distributed supercomputer in the world with a bunch of nodes that back up and verify their own transactions. And no one part of the ecosystem with an open sourced developer community. Okay, there's a bunch of weaknesses at every part of the chain, but combine them all together, it's the best we've got, and no one's ever going to be able to compete with it. So Bitcoin is it. Proof of work will never be created again. It was a freak that was created at a time when nobody cared, when there was no price, everyone thought it would fail. I personally, I don't like to say this because people go deep, but it's open source code. I do think it actually came out of a resistance against intelligence from factions in intelligence. Personally, I believe that. But it doesn't matter because it was mined and created in a fair way. It's open source code. There's no backdoor. It exists on a distributed supercomputer and it's backed up on nodes all around the world. So there's no way of controlling it. It's not Google. It's not a centralized service. So it doesn't matter. But, another time we'll do another podcast where we can go down that rabbit hole. But so there you have proof of work. The important thing is that when you have the most scarce asset in the world that's ever existed, and we've never had anything as scarce, maybe an Mona Lisa painting, but you can't use it as money. So once you've got something, we will only ever have 21 million Bitcoin, and that nobody can change it. And you can hold it in self-custody, and you can send it to anybody else without permission. That is game-changing. That is absolutely revolutionary, and it's the only thing we got like that. Remember gold? Gold is hard to send globally. I love gold. I'm not criticizing gold. I think people should own gold. It serves a very important hedge if the internet goes down. But gold is very hard to audit. You have to hold it in somebody else's coffers once you own it at scale. It's not got the practicality of digital scarcity, and it's not as scarce. So Bitcoin is a game changer in that sense. There reached a point when the proof of weapons network needed to recognize that this is probably a really useful tool when we transition from a dollar-dominated world to a multipolar world. And I think that Bitcoin will be used as a currency of a power structure in that transition. And so that created what I call two-tiered Bitcoin. Bitcoin that gives more power to the proof of weapons network, and Bitcoin that resists against the proof of weapons network. And the one that resists is held in self-custody with somebody running their own node with competing implementations of code on the largest distributed supercomputer, this mining network, which is geographically diversified globally with no affiliation to one country and doesn't have too much power in any of these capital markets. And so we have this struggle to keep Bitcoin as decentralized as possible. And don't treat this as a bad thing because it's more decentralized than anything in the world. But there's always pockets of weaknesses that a paranoid community should always be keeping an eye on. Now, what happened in 2021? Well, a bunch of people created companies to persuade people that if you give your Bitcoin to me, I'll give you some yield and you can end up with more Bitcoin. And if you give your Bitcoin to my exchange, I'll allow you to get exposure to Bitcoin on leverage. And if you give your Bitcoin to me, I'll use it as collateral and give you a fiat currency loan. You know, all of that went rampant in 2021. So people were asking for yield on their Bitcoin, people were borrowing against their Bitcoin, and people were leveraging their Bitcoin in order to trade and speculate. All usurious concepts that are guaranteed to end up with you having less Bitcoin at the end of it, unless you're part of the 1% in the proof of weapons network that can influence it because you've got access to the fiat currency money printer. Now, my personal belief, and this engages in speculation and conspiracy theories, but what are conspiracy theories? They're theories of conspiracies. And I theorize that Operation Choke Point 2.0 was a conspiracy to take down parts of the crypto market and replace it with the proof of weapons network two-tiered Bitcoin system. So how did they do that? Let's take one company, Celsius. I made the mistake of thinking it was a good idea to take less than 1% of my Bitcoin, put it in Celsius, borrow against it, and experiment with taking out a fiat currency loan rather than selling my Bitcoin. It was a mistake, but I ended up the 7th largest creditor in a bankruptcy process once he scammed all the money and took it down. And so, you know, he's now in prison today. Went to prison, Alex Mizhinsky, for 12 years. But I spent 2 years of my life engaging in a bankruptcy process. To me, it was a meaningless percentage of my wealth, but it still made me one of the largest creditors in the bankruptcy. And there were 650,000 victims, some of who committed suicide, lost their life, and were persuaded by this person to put their entire pension, their entire life savings, and leverage up their whole house and their whole life to only lose their Bitcoin and become bankrupt, and have a tax bill to pay for it, and have to engage in a legal process for 2 years. So I decided to hang around for 2 years and help a bunch of people out in that bankruptcy. And I had some money. I'd rather have that Bitcoin back. But when you look at it, and there was only one, I went into detail around all these bankruptcies, but there was one where I went every detail, including lobbying in court, persuading the judge not to sell the Bitcoin, doing all sorts of stuff. So I went through 4,000 pages of legal documents over 2 years because I obsessed over it. It became my topic for 2 years, where I did nothing else but really engage in what the hell is going on in this process. It was incredibly interesting to me because I'm a geek, and the legal process was interesting to me. But because I knew all the details that very few know, I know that Celsius was created by a Zionist IDF called Alex Mizhinsky and co-founded by Daniel Leone, who's now in Israel, that has a business with the Prime Minister's Office of Israel, whose wife was the head of loans, who now works for the IDF as head of social media propaganda, that was part of putting out in the New York Times the UNRWA was involved in October the 7th, that led to the starvation and famine campaign that's currently happening in Gaza right now through their propaganda. And one of the things that lost the balance was 35,000 ETH was stolen through a hack, through a company called Bnk DAO. And Bnk DAO, when you look at the shareholders of that company, was the largest shareholders were the niece and nephew of Benjamin Netanyahu. And so you had a hack that was happening at the Israeli level, with the head of lending that was issuing these loans at the Israeli level, with the guy that was going on YouTube every week telling people that they should empty out their life savings and get yield on their Bitcoin. That was the guy that went down to prison while all the others ended up fleeing to Israel, and now have AI startups with the Prime Minister's Office of Israel, when Benjamin Netanyahu's family hacked one of those things. Makes me question conspiracy theory again, whether all those things that we're told are Korean hacks are actually maybe Israeli hacks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're always told that it's the communists.
Mm-hmm.
But what was the way that you create the enemy, right?
Yeah.
You know, this is how you do it. Anyway, we're going down conspiracy theories, but hey, we can do that. So anyway, because I knew every detail about Celsius, I knew that this was an operation. And it led to 650,000 victims on a $25 billion Ponzi scheme that destroyed many Americans' retirement and pension, where some of them lost their life and had to flee to El Salvador to try and rebuild their life again because they couldn't afford to live in America anymore at age 70. You know, like this is the type of thing that I experienced throughout this. Now, that's just one. What if I had done the same for FTX? You know, where did Sam Bankman-Fried come from?
Mm-hmm.
I remember never hearing of Sam Bankman-Fried in 2016, and I knew everyone. I was a shareholder in most of the companies. Suddenly, there's this whiz kid that we're told is the man in crypto that made loads of money out of Bitcoin through the Japanese carry trade by arbitraging between South Korea and Japan, and made loads of Bitcoin. And suddenly, he's the only person that's writing regulations for the Senate. And he's the only person that can get a meeting with Gary Gensler at the SEC. Coinbase couldn't get a meeting. Like, the biggest companies in the industry couldn't even meet the head of the SEC. But Sam Bankman-Fried could. And, you know, so who is that guy? And yeah, I didn't spend the same level of detail, but just an overview. I saw some of the monetary flows. I saw the funds that were going through the Ukrainian accounts. I saw the bribes with the Chinese banks. But then what cases dropped? Political bribery. They said, right, we got him on 7 counts. Let's not do the other 2. We don't need to look at the political bribery count stuff. Let's not look at those monetary flows. Let's not look at all the real estate transactions and who was behind the Bohemian side and where that went back to. But I can pretty much tell you it went back to the same places that I found in Celsius. And so that's just 2. You could go through BlockFi, you could go through Voyager, and I dug a little bit deeper, and I could tell you similar stories. Okay, so now we've got all these cases. What was the end result? The end result is we had Terra Luna blow up. We had oil prices after the Russian invasion that led to this spiking in oil prices. Inflationary, Federal Reserve said inflation is transitionary. Suddenly we had to spike rates. That bankrupted a bunch of treasury bond investors. We had the fall of Silicon Valley Bank. We had the taking out of Silvergate, Signature. We had Celsius that went into Chapter 11, Voyager that went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, FTX that went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Binance, that only got 4 months, didn't go into bankruptcy, but was told you need to install a US compliance department, immediately started complying with the IDF and shutting down accounts of Palestinians, Turks, Lebanese, on request from the Prime Minister's Office of Israel. Had a US compliance team installed. was able to become a shareholder, and then suddenly started doing deals with the Trump administration through his stablecoin at World Liberty Financial that led to Binance having a $2 billion deal done through Trump's stablecoin that he now gets $60 million of interest based upon US debt that then went back into the Qatari and Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth funds. So that you can have this transition in stablecoins, tokenization, all the things that are happening today. If you took what's happening today, you could point it back to Operation Choke Point 2.0. What came from that? All the companies went into bankruptcy, a bunch of them. And all of a sudden, BlackRock gets the ETF approved. And all of a sudden, Trump comes in and he's the crypto guy. And all of a sudden, we're going to give you a Bitcoin strategic reserve in order to save America. But by the way, those Bitcoins, yeah, they belong to Bitfinex. I know that. I know that because I was a Bitfinex shareholder in 2016 and helped them. And the Department of Justice took those Bitcoin after the hack, which, by the way, goes back to Israel as well, and Ukraine. And after that hack, the Department of Justice got the money back. And you're telling me that's the Bitcoin strategic reserve? No, that's I own some of those Bitcoin. I'm a shareholder in Bitfinex, and we helped a bunch of other shareholders. But anyway, you end up with all the crypto-friendly banks being shut down. You end up with the 24/7 bank rails through stable coins, and that allowed for the funneling of money between Alameda, Celsius, FTX, Voyager, BlockFi. That all gets shut down. They're all in the same bank, by the way, pushing money around in the fiat currency rails via their blockchain network. Where did they get that? Where did Silvergate get that blockchain network? They bought it off Facebook. Facebook was shut down for their Libra project. The Libra project ends up in Silvergate, Signature, Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank gets wiped out. How did Silicon Valley Bank get wiped out? I was on a space with Mario Nafal when Peter Thiel came up and told everyone, withdraw your money from Silicon Valley Bank.
Go ahead.
We still here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Withdraw your money from Silicon Valley Bank. Now we get a run on the bank. We get a crash of the bond market. And who came up on the same space? Bill Ackman. Bill Ackman came up on the space and said, we need to save the US banking system. The entire system is going to collapse, and I will buy Silicon Valley Bank with a group of my investors for $1, as long as the Federal Reserve and FDIC bails out the system. So FDIC takes over the crypto-friendly banks, shuts them down. The executives at those banks said, we're fine. Two of them said we're not. One of them said we're fine. And Bill Ackman lobbied to try and buy that bank. This is the same Bill Ackman that is deeply interconnected between very questionable things with the assassination of Charlie Kirk at the moment. Not saying anything there. There's just questions to ask. Those are being asked. But this mafia network seems to suddenly come back with, all right, Bitcoin ETF. And so now we're in January 2024. The Bitcoin ETF launches, the most successful launch of all time of ETFs. BlackRock ends up with like 700,000 Bitcoin. And what do we get next? Trump comes along. Trump says, we'll do the Bitcoin strategic reserve. The crypto lobby pay for him. The shitcoiners will pay for him to get in power. And then suddenly we got a shitcoin casino. And what is the big thing that happens? What is the first thing that actually happens? Genius Act. Genius Act had a mechanism for launching stable coins, programmatic fiat currency, and Elon Musk gets one, Trump gets one, JP Morgan gets one, Bank of America is going to have one. All of the BlackRock portfolio companies are all getting their own stable coin. What else was in there? Well, JP Morgan lobbied to say only banks can issue yield on those stable coins. So now banks can do it, and only Federal Reserve banks can utilize their reserves to issue stable coins. So now they can issue a stable coin on $3.5 trillion of reserves at the Federal Reserve, which are bonds, and they can pay yield and they can issue stable coins. This is a covert central bank digital currency where JP Morgan is the chosen one. And Trump gets to get a bunch of corrupt stuff through World Liberty Financial. And they all get to say, I'm the champion of Bitcoin. I'm the champion of crypto. Crypto is going to change the world. Meanwhile, he launches a meme coin scam, a bunch of NFTs, a casino on top of Ethereum, a stable coin backed by treasuries, where the higher the yield on the debt, the more money he makes. And you end up with this rush for every company in crypto to go public. Kraken, go public. Coinbase, already public. Robinhood, already public. Marathon, already public. All the Bitcoin mining companies, please go public in America and host your Bitcoin mining in Texas. And we'd like to become the #1 shareholders, and we'll launch a blockchain ETF. We'll also launch a Bitcoin ETF. We'll also launch a shitcoin ETF. We'll also launch an Ethereum ETF. And by the way, SEC, can we stake those ETH? When we stake it, it means that we control the network. We're the #1 validator. We get the governance. Oh man, proof of work. We can't control Bitcoin, but can we become the #1 shareholders in as many Bitcoin mining companies? What else can we do? Hey, Cantor, Howard Lutnick, Jeffrey Epstein's neighbor. Howard Lutnick, the guy that with Steve Witkoff lent money to Urban Movers, which was the company that was had bombs during 9/11. The Israelis that were arrested and were blacked out of the investigation on 9/11. The ones that were celebrating with the dancing Israelis and the Israeli Mossad artists that were in the building with the contract. Those ones, Steve Witkoff. Oh, right. So we now got Howard Lutnick as Treasury Secretary. Sorry, the George Soros guy. You talked about the Bank of England and the Euro. What's his name? I'm forgetting his name. Who's the Treasury Secretary? Not in UK, in US. I'm drawing a blank, and he was part of the George Soros. It will come back to me in a second. You got Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary, and you got envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. This is the deep state mafia. And they're all connected to the PayPal mafia, Elon Musk, David Sachs, Peter Thiel. Elon got the contract to do Department of Government Efficiency, which took all the CI data, all the Pentagon data, all the IRS data, all the government data, integrated it into an artificial intelligence nightmare. And then he's allowed to borrow against his stock and buy X. I'm the freedom of speech guy. You guys talk while I build a social credit score. You say whatever you want. I won't give you freedom of reach. I won't accelerate your message unless you're part of our network. But if you're not part of our network, say what you want, and you can algorithmically create your social credit score, and I'll know exactly what you believe in. You start talking about these things, you'll be penalized in the future, and it'll be integrated with these social credit, with these stable coins. But I'm the freedom of speech guy. And in the meantime, I'm going to do covert operations to overthrow the government in Brazil and Venezuela. I'm also going to pretend that I care about grooming gangs in the UK, manufacture civil unrest. I'm going to prop up Tommy Robinson, an Israeli paid network. And I'm going to suddenly collectively care about the atrocities that happened with these grooming gangs. And that gives me more control over Keir Starmer, more control over Macron, more control for the proof of weapons network, because Elon is a node of the technical industrial complex for the BlackRock proof of weapons network.
And have a public theatrical fallout with Donald Trump.
Yeah, everything's like, what was the Zelensky humiliation ritual? What did that lead to? The Zelensky humiliation ritual was Trump's going to say, I pretend that I want peace. The CIA doesn't want peace. BlackRock is cashing in on Ukraine. Palantir, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic. The UK is collateralizing all the debt. We're spending $3 billion, money printing from the European Central Bank. Russia's going to take all the land in the end anyway, but Trump American companies get all the rare earth minerals that are needed for those batteries, iPhones, and laptops. And that was I'm going down too many rabbit holes. Anyway, let's get back to the crypto one. I got to focus.
Scott Bessent was the name you were looking for.
Scott Bessent, thank you very much. So Scott Bessent, the George Soros currency raider. By the way, the price of the dollar in foreign currency terms has been going down and down and down. Went from $102 to below $97. The purchasing power domestically is causing massive civil unrest in America, massive divide. At the same time as, getting this left and right circus, people thinking it's the Republicans, it's the loony left Democrats, it's the far right Nazis, like all of that shit. You pick your favorite narrative. It's the Muslim invasion, it's the Zionists, Jews rule the world. All of that is a tool. They don't care about any of it. Like, pick your whatever narrative, they'll weaponize it. It's a useful tool. And that's creating real tensions to vassalize America further into the proof of weapons network, and UK and European Union. Anyway, so back to the crypto side. Operation Choke Point 2.0, I believe, was a coordinated operation in order to create a two-tier Bitcoin system. And Howard Lutnick, that's where I was going, Cantor Fitzgerald, you'll notice a commonality. Trump got his sons to create World Liberty Financial. Mm-hmm. Howard Lutnick got his son to run Cantor Fitzgerald. Steve Witkoff was a shareholder in World Liberty Financial via his sons for the stablecoin side. So now you've got this trio, as it were, and they're creating crypto capital. Everyone's celebrating. We're going to perpetuate the dollar, the proof of weapons network, around the world using stable coins. And we're going to have it integrated with Palantir, which is the artificial intelligence technology. We're going to have a social credit score, which is why Elon got X and why Jack Dorsey was expelled for doing what every tech company has to do, which is give a backdoor to the NSA. Edward Snowden told us that. So you've got this technocratic Orwellian 1984 nightmare. And by the way, this has nothing to do with Trump. Replace Trump with someone else. He was just the guy that was here to do that. It was the same under Biden. It was the same under every single one of them. They are there to just put a narrative on what they're doing for the proof of weapons network.
Your vote matters, don't you?
Exactly. Your vote matters. That's a massive destruction. The vote that does matter is your money, and we will get to solutions in the end. Your money is the real vote. Mm-hmm. But you had this operation, we'll call it Operation Choke Point 2.0, and in the end of it, to have Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and they can lever up. You have this deregulation environment for leverage on the exchanges. You have the perpetuation of stablecoin as a national policy through Genius Act. You have the SEC saying, go create as many shitcoins, meme coins, do what you like. I mean, I'm okay with that, but this is what you have as the result. You have no Bitcoin strategic reserve other than confiscation.
Bitcoin the only stolen reserve. Let's call it what it is. It's a Bitcoin stolen reserve. Always will be, always going to be.
So we'll take the Bitcoin if we can steal it from you, but we ain't going to do anything else because we're taking down the dollar. That's the operation. This is a multipolar world. Trump is the guy that gets to profit from it. Okay. Then you have as many Bitcoin and Bitcoin ETFs. Then Cantor Fitzgerald comes out and says, We've got an access to billions of dollars because they're a discount broker into the Federal Reserve that we can lend you if you put your Bitcoin with us. So we've got Celsius 2.0, different model under the sophistication of the proof of weapons network. Won't be the same type of fraud, but it will be a rug pull. And we then have as many public companies. Let's take all these zombie companies and let's put a face on them. Michael Saylor, you're brilliant at pitching Bitcoin. You do that. David Bailey, you do one. Cantor Fitzgerald will get you the funding. We'll get the investment bank. We'll find the shell company. You go public and you get to create a pump and dump. Jack Mallers, you get in bed with Tether and the Bank of Japan SoftBank mafia and Cantor Fitzgerald mafia. And I'm sorry, Jack Mallers, you probably don't know what you signed up for, but once you're in, you never come out. You can't leave that network. Charlie Kirk tried to leave that network. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. You can't leave that network. You have got yourself in bed with forces that you may not understand. You need to stay there. And we'll create as many public companies as we can to get as much Bitcoin as we can. So with Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin, we now got 17% of the Bitcoin in ETFs and public treasury companies. And we've got a deregulation environment. And guess what? If you own your Bitcoin with BlackRock, it's tax-free and you can put it as part of your inheritance plan. You can do it via your 401k. And guess what? Our 401ks are now opening up to more and more products. We'll buy a bunch of private equity, a bunch of crypto. And now you can have index funds with all the shitcoin casino as well. Why don't you use your index of a shitcoin, of a meme coin as collateral at the same time as diversifying your Bitcoin in collateral so that you can get your fiat currency loan and you can repackage your mortgage in order to take advantage of this Bitcoin revolution? So they have created the Bitcoin industrial complex that tries to make you not own your Bitcoin in self-custody. You don't need Bitcoin. You have our public company. You don't need Bitcoin. Put it here and we'll give you a fiat currency loan. You don't need your Bitcoin. We'll give you an ETF. And when we need to manipulate the markets like the Federal Reserve has done 20 times in its history, it's done 20 pump and dumps, which ended up with the accumulation of more assets for the proof of weapons network. We'll take your Bitcoin because it's two-tiered Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin in self-custody and it's Bitcoin in the proof of weapons network. So they have constructed, I believe, a multi-year operation in order to steal your Bitcoin. It involves mining companies, and let's get into the knots versus core. Adam Back, mentioned in the white paper, cypherpunk, massive respect, got nothing but respect for everything that he used to do. But suddenly he started pitching stable coins. Suddenly he started getting involved in Bitcoin treasury companies. That's not the cypherpunk I knew and met and loved. That's a very different version. And suddenly he started being involved in Blockstream. And I know that we're scarred from the Bitcoin Cash psyop back in the day. But I think there was a little bit of truth from the other side that maybe Blockstream was an operation for the proof of weapons network to be able to get some significant control over the developers. Maybe. I can't have evidence from that. Just because the solution was the wrong solution, Bitcoin Cash shitcoin, doesn't mean we shouldn't listen to the attack vectors that might have been underway at the time. So you've got Blockstream that hires all the devs. Luke Dash Jr. goes away. Adam Back starts launching Bitcoin treasury companies. And suddenly we got Zionists that believe in nuclear warfare, like Peter Todd, that said we should increase the number of Bitcoin that doesn't, or says that he doesn't own any Bitcoin. Like, that's not the Bitcoiners that I remember. And these people are involved in core and code. And then they get really upset when somebody else comes along and says, why don't we can create a competing version that might reduce what we perceive to be an attack vector, which is shoving bad things in the blockchain. Now, I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. What I'm saying is, and I do have an opinion, but this is the decentralized war that we have whenever we're meant to have it. Chaos is meant to be the way. That's how it happened with all the previous block wars and various other wars in the sector. But I think core needs to have a check and control. I think it needs a competing implementation. I think every human, whether they are good or bad, this isn't an assessment on someone's character, is capable of being attacked by the proof of weapons network, whether that be ransom, whether that be assassination, whether that be Epsteined, whether that be block streamed, whether that be Cantor Fitzgerald, whether that be Bitcoin treasuryed, whether that be stable coined. They are all capable of being forced into this network voluntarily or involuntarily. So we need a competing implementation, because if core is corrupt and gets corrupted, we got BlackRock that wants to be on the board of as many Bitcoin mining companies in America as possible. We've got America that wants to get as much of the mining in Texas. We got BlackRock that now has these ETFs and actively managed funds that are buying Bitcoin. And we have BlackRock that may want to get leverage over the core development community. Now, we know that there's user-activated soft forks, and I have no doubt that Bitcoin can stand this attack. But let's not be stupid, people. Let's have competing implementations, and let's make sure that core knows if you go down the wrong path, it doesn't matter. We've got another plan. And that's what solved the block war debate. It's when the miners wanted to go down one route, the venture capitalists centralized many of the companies, and the node operators said, no, we're going to do a user-activated soft fork if you try and hard fork this in the wrong direction. And then we ended up with the solutions that we ended up with. But that's how Bitcoin works. And we can't be ignorant enough to think that there's not a lot of people, and the proof of weapons network would do whatever it can to control this proof of work network.
Yeah,
because I do think they want to weaponize it.
And I honestly like this idea of the Trojan horse, Bitcoin being the Trojan horse, and the Bitcoin treasury companies are building the bridge for all of this fiat to come across from that rail into the Bitcoin rail and free everybody and hyper Bitcoinize. And it's like it's happening the other way around. What's happening is it's validating the proof of weapons network through all of this financial engineering. By the way, here's a fun, go to any AI agent you want and just put in, list all jobs, all engineering jobs, and you'll get about 40. Not one of them says financial engineering, right? Not one of them. But too many people are getting caught up in this hype right now, and you're not building the bridge. You're validating the existing system by doing that, and you're not helping the Joe on the street get more Bitcoin in their pocket. You're just not. So if people are buying these shares instead of Bitcoin, they're getting counterparty risk with the brokerage firm that they've bought the shares through. They're getting counterparty risk with the CEO of the company, and they're just getting a share certificate in a computer. They're not taking self-custody of Bitcoin. The only thing that you can actually have a loyal title over, that's it. It's the only property we can truly own. You're not going to own your house because somebody can always come and take it away from you, and you've registered it and you're paying tax on it and whatever else. Even if you're mortgage-free, you're still paying tax. That is still registered at a land registry somewhere, and when you register something, you've given up ownership of it. Same with your car. Even if you bought the car outright with cash, it's registered at the DVLA. It's their car. The only thing we can have truly ownership over is Bitcoin in self-custody. End of story. So I just want to leave people on that note, because Simon, we've gone way over time, and I will please come back because there's so much more for us to talk about.
I'm gonna do one more segment for you because I wanna leave this on a high, because I've been involved in this is dark shit, and we talk about the black pill and the orange pill and the red pill. It is a black pill, how the world actually works, but until you have an accurate representation of reality and truth, and that involves going down some dark places, and it involves theorizing about conspiracies that are happening in real time, because we still haven't been told the truth about Epstein or JFK or any of these things. So they're never going to tell you. But we know with a good degree of accuracy and a geopolitical understanding, and when you understand proof of work and proof of weapons, I like to think that the Bitcoin community, through this, don't trust, verify type of mentality, would have been the ones that would be receptive to this message. But there are agents out there, and I know this because I've been involved in the anti-war movement for a long, long time. And I've been debating on spaces against the propaganda of saying that Zionism is about hating Jews and all sorts of stupid shit that's designed to censor you. And I know that there are agents that are there, agents of misinformation to manufacture consent to confuse you. There are agents designed to make you give your Bitcoin over to Wall Street. And so understand that this is the world we live in. And unfortunately, we are entering into a world where we can't even trust what we see in front of us, particularly with artificial intelligence. Like, I don't trust anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're all going through that because we all experienced those lockdowns. So we all experienced the lie after lie after lie. And we now know at this point categorically that they're willing to do the unthinkable. They don't care. They'll inject you with a vaccine if it's what they need to do, despite whatever. We'll all have our own theories,
mm-hmm.
but you have to go down these theories. And remember, Operation Mockingbird was an operation by the CIA to take over the media, and all those talking heads on Fox News and CNN are actually CIA operatives to push a narrative to justify war, vaccines, whatever they need. Putin's the biggie monster, whatever one's needed. It's the communists, it's the Democrat lefties, it's the Republican far right Nazis. They're all there to do that, okay? And the word conspiracy theory was created by the CIA in order to weaponize and make you feel foolish, so that you can just shut down conversation whenever you get close to what the CIA are up to. We're never going to have confirmation. We do have declassified documents. I recommend books like Operation Gladio by Paul Williams, and Covert Regime Change, where it goes through all the covert wars. Lots and lots of books. And so, that you do get declassified, but you have to theorize while it's happening, and you have to analyze. And my map of the world is follow the money, don't listen to the politician or media. And I don't get it right all the time, but when I follow the money, I get indications. Like, for example, if you look at the balance sheet and the financial statements of Lockheed Martin and General Dynamic right now, you'll see that their contracts are switching from manufacturing contracts to AI and cybersecurity. You'll also know that their budget and contracts in the Middle East are reducing, and their contracts in Europe and Asia Pacific are increasing. That's a leading indicator for what's coming next.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I'm just saying that's the type of methodology that I use because I'm a finance geek and a monetary geek. And everything is the opposite of what they tell you. Everything is a lie. Everything is a complete lie. And so how do we function in a world where trust is so low and we can't trust what we see? Well, sadly, that is the world we're in today, and they're weaponizing it. And so you need to protect yourself. Like, if you have subscribed to something like MAGA, Make America Great Again, he ain't going to make America great again. He's going to make his donors great again. And he was funded by three people primarily: Elon Musk, the technical industrial complex for the proof of weapons network, the Mellon family, which is the financial industrial complex for BlackRock, and Adelston, which is the Israel side. And Israel is an outpost for the military industrial complex, that points all back to the proof of weapons network. So he is as deep state as they get. And his job is to put a narrative that makes you feel like he's helping you. He's not helping you. Okay? It's not how the system works. And so with that in mind, what can you do to protect yourself? And I like to leave people with an orange pill. And the orange pill is that you can boycott the proof of weapons network simply by buying proof of work, which is Bitcoin. No other proof of work compares to Bitcoin. If you haven't figured that out yet, then please learn. Listen to more podcasts. Learn. It's a journey. You'll understand why Bitcoin proof of work is different to everything else eventually. Okay. So then you get to boycott the proof of weapons network, the Federal Reserve. You're outside of the system. But they obviously want you to do that with BlackRock. So that's the next psyop. They want you to own an ETF instead. So you can boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody. Learn self-custody. It's a skill. It's not that hard. If you haven't done it before, it's like the first time you use a debit card. You didn't know how to get the code. You didn't know how to put it in the wall. You didn't know how to call the number and get the SMS. You had to learn how to do that. But once you did it, you can now tap your card and you know how to use it every time. Sending Bitcoin in self-custody is easy as sending an email. Once you learn it, just learn it. You have to learn it. You have to learn it because you need to secure your identity in the future, your social media, your everything, your artificial intelligence. Like, if you're going to play in this new world, you're either going to be on a universal basic income in a central Orwellian 1984 central bank digital currency stablecoin standard, or you're going to be in Bitcoin in self-custody, and I put gold in that category as well. So you boycott the Fed by owning Bitcoin. That's money outside the system. You boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody, getting the second tier of the two-tiered Bitcoin. Then you don't borrow against it. You own more Bitcoin every single month. Now, historically, I can't promise you this will happen again, but I still do it to this day. Ever since $3, I set myself a commitment, buy more Bitcoin every month. I was deep in debt. By the end of it, my debt was insignificant relative to the Bitcoin wealth, and I achieved something I never imagined was possible. Then I could go back and pay down my debt. And in fact, this is a personal choice. I can't give advice because there's consequences. But the only way I could escape is I stopped paying my debt and I bought Bitcoin instead. And that had consequences. I can't make that decision for you, but it worked for me. And so by paying myself first and saving in Bitcoin and owning it in self-custody, I managed to boycott the debt-based system. In 2021, it went wrong for me because I betrayed my principles. What did I do? I put them on Celsius. I borrowed against it. I ended up in a bankruptcy. Now, that was the plan, whatever life throws at you. However, you boycott the fiat currency system and the banks by not borrowing against it and by buying Bitcoin every month. And if it outperforms all assets, as it has historically, over a 4 to 10 year cycle, after 10 years, after 4 years of doing that, I've got millions of people into Bitcoin. And after 4 years of doing that, I've never had one person come back to me and say, I'm sorry I did that. Everyone came back and said it changed their life. They never looked back. And so then you don't even need to borrow. And that's how you drain the swamp. You don't need to borrow. Some of you will borrow. I understand there's financial considerations, but the less you do that, the more you boycott this system. Once you are wealthy, and even today, think about who you're purchasing from. am I handing my money over to BlackRock and supporting the system that is doing harm to me? Am I buying from my local farm, or am I buying from a global institution? Boycott as many of these global institutions as you can. Boycott the stock market by divesting and owning Bitcoin. And be conscious with your money. Now, it's not a perfect science. I still need AI. I still need an iPhone. I got to be productive. But where I can, I figure out how I can boycott those companies and support my local farmer, my local community. And when I'm investing, I think about, am I investing something that helps decentralization or supports centralization? Just become conscious. And if we all do that, we drain the swamp. And here's the real thing. Your vote doesn't matter. Politicians are not elected. They are selected by the Proof of Weapons Network. But who are the Proof of Weapons Network? They are a group of companies that have a share price. And when you impact that share price and bottom line and profit, they listen. I've seen it time and time again. The CEO of Starbucks was overthrown because all the people in Malaysia that were boycotting Zionism because they were investing in settlements in West Bank got the overthrow of the board by boycotting. And so don't let them believe that that it doesn't work. It does work. And even if it doesn't work, at least I personally believe money has spiritual energy. If you're spending blood money, that comes with consequences. I don't know your religious or spiritual belief, but my belief is that we meet our maker and we answer to our maker. And so even if it's karma, whatever's right for you, I'm not preaching here, but whatever is right for you, there is blood money. Money has energy that comes with it. And so make sure that your money has good energy and it's supporting local. And then that's, you either get to exit the system and you're okay in your little silo in your community and you can help more people and you can orange pill more people. Or we actually have an impact and we become more powerful than a Proof of Weapons Network. Sadly, too many people gave their Bitcoin to the tier 1 Bitcoin, and you're making the Proof of Weapons Network more powerful. And so I don't have faith that we'll be able to defeat that network, but I think we should all aim to live here, and those things we can do. And so that's what I encourage everybody to do. Boycott the system, and proof of work is the orange pill for the black pill of Proof of Weapons Network. Commit to truth, study harder. The world is way more evil in this network than you think is possible. But there's a beautiful side to the world, and way more people are good people, but there's a few bunch of psychopaths that control this system, and you just need to know how to figure out how to work. So vote with your money. And we'll leave it there and we'll do another podcast in the future.
Yeah, I look forward to it, mate. I really do, because there's so many other topics that I wanted to get into, but you've nailed absolutely everything. Really appreciate everything you're doing. Please, if nobody's listened to Bitcoin Hard Talk, go and subscribe. Help Simon spread the message as far wide and as possible. Where can people find you? What's the best way to reach you? And then, we'll call it quits. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no worry. I'm blessed enough to have created my business with Bitcoin where I never took on Silicon Valley money and never went public. And so I'm in the process of kind of just being a treasury with no Wall Street agenda. And so I no longer have any connection to anything. I'm divesting from all my investments and I'm just staying in the Bitcoin self-custody world. So I'm taking as many things away as possible. So I'm literally in a place right now where all I care about is for as many people to own Bitcoin in self-custody. So I have no actual agenda in that sense because I managed to avoid all that shit. And so I regularly am on X. So follow me at Simon Dixon Twit. And I go up on spaces and try to answer questions to people. I go live every single week on my YouTube channel. Type in Simon Dixon. I do every week. I take all the events this week in Bitcoin, all the events this week in macroeconomics, and all the events this week in geopolitics, and tie them together to follow the money so that you can develop the skills and try and get further ahead. And so you can subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And then I syndicate that everywhere on simondixon.com and Apple Podcasts, Bitcoin Hard Talk, and Spotify, and anywhere that you want it. And that's all I got.
Excellent, mate. Well, I'll put it all in all the links in the show notes so people can come and find you. And appreciate you going well over time here. Really amazing. And yeah, I'll be in touch again soon.
Okay, appreciate you, brother. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.